Hi, this is Elizabeth from BooksGoSocial, and I'm going to be joined today by Harold Gershowitz, who is going to be talking about his book, The Eden Legacy. The first thing I want to ask you was, how did you get into writing? What kind of started you on the process to being an author?
Well, I actually began writing as a teenager. I always enjoyed writing. Even when I was in business school, I was a journalism minor so that I would be able to write. And then life kind of got in the way, and I pursued a career in business for a long time, which turned out well. But at the first opportunity, I began taking long vacations that were writing vacations. And some years ago, I wrote my first novel, which was Remember This Dream, which did quite well. It was a very exciting time for us. It was more of a family saga that covered a long period of time. It was a typical story of immigrants from Europe, some of whom made it to America and some didn't, and followed them back and forth over a period of many years. And that book went on to win the Friends of Literature Award for Fiction.
Yes, I saw that. Very exciting.
It became a Chicago Tribune bestseller, and it was a very exciting time. And about then, I was getting very close to being able to retire from a business career. And sometime later, I wrote Heirs of Eden, which was a totally different story. It dealt more with the upheaval of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict beginning in 1948, and dealt with two individuals, two central characters, one a Palestinian girl and a Jewish boy that she meets in the inner city in Washington, D.C., and then follows them into adulthood. And then the current book, The Eden Legacy, is a sequel to the first book. And it takes them well into their careers. And the conflict in the Middle East, going all the way up to and beyond the Six-Day War. So it's a story of conflict, intrigue, and how people from two different cultures who love one another very much contend with this huge international conflict.
So, you touched on there that this book, The Eden Legacy, is a sequel then to Heirs of Eden.
That's correct.
Yeah. What kind of inspired you to go on to the sequel with these characters?
When Heirs of Eden was finished, and it developed a really terrific following, especially where I was known, everyone asked, it was the most common question, well, what happens to these people now? Because when I first finished Heirs of Eden, the story was tied in kind of a knot, a tight knot. The couple, Alexandra and Noah, were together, having overcome tremendous conflict, and there was their whole future ahead of them, because at this point in time, they are only in their mid-20s. So the book had followed them from the time they were 11 years old until their mid-20s. She had become a journalist, he a businessman, and everyone wanted to know, what's the rest of their lives like? What happens to them now? So we went on and developed The Eden Legacy, which was the sequel. And now I'm working on the third book in the series, which will end the trilogy of what I call the Eden series.
Oh, nice. So it was more kind of the fans that pushed you on then to go and continue on with this story.
Very much so. There was certainly a lot of room to continue the story, but I felt like Heirs of Eden ended at a good and even a hopeful point in time. But the readers of the book weren't quite satisfied with it. They said, well, we've got to know what happens to these people. So we've carried the book forward for another decade.
Great. So that's obviously next then on the agenda, is starting with the third book and continuing on with the same characters then.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. And I feel like I know these people really well, very much a part of my life. I like them a lot. And I'm kind of anxious to see exactly what's going to happen.
But that leads in nicely to my next question, because I was going to ask you, when you're planning out a novel, do you have a structured plan, or do you feel like the story comes flowing out of you and that's how you find where it ends up?
That's a really good question. I have certain plot points that I know I will want to cover during the duration of the book. But I become as excited to see what is going to happen to these characters as I write, as I hope the reader will be. So there are surprises for me as the author as I write the book. I particularly enjoy writing dialogue. Excuse me. And I think I know where the dialogue is going to go when I begin a section. But as you jump into each character's head, so that the dialogue is as authentic as it can be, they want to say things you hadn't anticipated.
Sure.
So they express themselves through me, but I'm as anxious as anyone to see just where they're going to lead the reader, and to a certain extent, me as the author. Okay.
And do you find now that are you writing full time, or do you take certain days of the week where you write? How do you go about structuring, getting into the writing mood?
That's a good question. I work with two screens when I write. I have all of my research on one, and the narrative that I'm working on in the manuscript on the other. And on some days, I'll spend the entire time just honing the research that I want to work into the book. And on other days, the book kind of flows very nicely from that additional perspective that I have, having done the research. What I do find when I'm writing is that the characters tell me a great deal about where they want the story to go. And I would imagine, as a book reader, listening to an author say that, people might have trouble really believing that that could be the case.
Yeah.
The expression that I use is that when it's flowing well, I feel like I'm very much in a zone.
Yeah.
And I am as much a spectator as a writer.
Sure.
I find that surprising, and I find that the most enjoyable part of what I'm writing, because to a certain extent, I always want to see what's going to happen.
Sure.
So some of the plot, I know I will want to cover. There are points that, before I write the first word, that I know I'm going to want part of the book to be based around. But the characters do a remarkable job of taking off on their own. And to me, that's what propels writing. I want to see what's going to happen.
You mentioned there now that you do quite a bit of research. And I certainly read that you had done quite a lot of traveling to research the Heirs of Eden initially. Is that same research driving then the whole of the trilogy, or are you going out and doing more research for those books?
Well, I will do more research. In fact, not very long ago, my wife and I returned from the Middle East. So to me, one of the most joyful parts of writing historical fiction is the research, because it's a constant learning process. You know, I will read things and say to myself, you know, I really didn't know that. And to me, the greatest compliment is when the book is finally published and readers write to me or comment at a book club meeting or at a lecture that I'm given, I didn't know that.
Sure.
So when they read fiction, when they read a story that they're really enjoying and learning about the history in a way that sharpens their perspective of what happened, causes them to say, I didn't know that. To me, that's the absolute highest compliment a writer could look for.
Well, it shows that you're doing not just a service in terms of providing a story, but also in providing extra knowledge to people.
Oh, and I think when you're writing historical fiction, if you fail to do that, then you've done nothing else but created a story, and you've missed the real point. You do want your reader to come away with a much sharper focus about what happened in the real world as told through the story you're writing. To me, that's what writing historical fiction is all about. If it doesn't impart a really worthwhile lesson that gives people something to really think about and ponder, then you've just entertained them. Historical fiction, I think, has to entertain but really teach at the same time.
Oh, interesting. Just kind of looking ahead, I see that you do quite a lot of online writing. You have essays that you publish online quite often.
Oh, I do, every week.
Yes, and I feel do you find that's something that helps to get the juices going to write a novel? Is it something that you just do to practice writing? How do you approach it?
Well, I write about things I really care about. They tend to be public affairs. They deal with the politics of the day and the issue of the day. The series is called Of Thee I Sing 1776. They publish every week. And I think it keeps me very focused on current events. And for someone who loves history, as I really do, you begin to appreciate how past history impacts on the events that you're writing about today. It's a continuum. And my stories simply find their proper place in that continuum. So writing about current events, I think, gives me a much greater appreciation for how we, our readers, you in Ireland, got to where you are today. Nothing was created out of thin air. There's a huge history. And so I write it because I want to keep writing skills well lubricated. But at the same time, it constantly generates new ideas about how events that happened a generation ago led to where we are today. And the important point is for the reader to begin to realize that none of this takes place in complete isolation. It is a continuum. And hopefully, individuals begin to think about their place in that continuum. Because in large numbers, they affect history too.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, because we obviously are in the business of self-publishing. So I was wondering, in terms of marketing yourself as an author, how have you found that process?
It's been very interesting. I've published both ways. My first book, Remember This Dream, was published by one of the world's largest publishers, Bantam Dell Doubleday. When I wrote Heirs of Eden, sadly my agent had passed away, and having a keen experience of the time that goes by, from the time Remember This Dream was submitted, purchased, and paid for by Bantam until the book actually appeared on bookshelves was nearly 3 years.
Okay.
And I suppose that was fine when I was in my 40s, but I didn't want to wait. I really wanted to take greater control of the publishing process. And there are advantages and disadvantages, although I think the disadvantages are melting away today because of the internet and social media. When I published with Bantam, Remember This Dream had distribution all over America. It was published throughout the UK in hardcover by a UK publisher. Wonderful experience. But it took 3 years. And I also learned that I still had to do all of the promotion. Very little. The expression they used was that your book will be market driven. which means if it sells, it sells, and if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Sure, yeah.
And that didn't sit real well with me when I got around to Heirs of Eden, even though Remember This Dream had done very well. So I liked the idea of what Amazon had created, this independent publishing platform where writers could take charge of that process. It's very time consuming, but I feel like it's mine to succeed with or to fail with. I know from the reviews that we've had and from reader feedback that the story in both books, Heirs of Eden and The Eden Legacy, is very, very well received. So we have this continuing process, which you guys are doing a great job of helping with, in getting the existence of the book and a little bit about the story out to hundreds of thousands of people. And we'll see what happens, but I have high hopes.
And do you think your business background has any help towards getting your book out there?
Well, mine does, because I was a senior vice president of a very large international company, and all of our marketing and public relations and advertising had to pass through me. So I've worked with the top agencies in the world, Ogilvy and Mather, and many of the really great pioneers in the field. Social media is very different.
Sure, yeah.
I felt like I was a bit of a dinosaur when I started getting involved with social media, but I think I have a good feel for marketing and what sells, and as a result, I'm enjoying the process a great deal.
Good. So, just to kind of wrap up the chat then that we're having here, I had just one last unusual question, which was to tell me something unusual about yourself.
That is an unusual question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm at a stage in my life, my wife and I both are actually, where we have the independence to spend a lot of time the way we most want to spend it. And we're both kind of committed to doing things that we feel are highly worthwhile. And we've been doing that. We live in the California desert. We enjoy that too. But rather late in life, based on the things that I've done, I've had some very rewarding experience. For example, the Catholic Theological Union, which is the largest Catholic graduate school in North America, conferred an honorary doctorate degree in humane letters on me not so long ago. And that was in recognition of things that I've done since retiring from a working career.
Right, interesting.
And that has been very, very satisfying. Here in Southern California, I'm a trustee of a wonderful performing arts center. I'm a director, actually the treasurer of the Barbara Sinatra Center for Abused Children, which the work of the Sinatra Center is worldwide now. And, I think that we turn in at night and say, we've done something worthwhile on a number of occasions that kind of make life worthwhile.
Yeah.
So I think that personally, Diane and I, my wife, who incidentally does a lot of the research for all of my writing,
interesting.
We simply feel like we're living a very worthwhile life.
Brilliant. I think that's a very inspirational way for us to end this interview, because I think a lot of people we would have who would be self-publishing would find that they, often are working and don't have the time to publish. But I think your success after retiring with your publishing and with, other things you're doing is really inspirational to people. Things don't end once you finish working, it's only the beginning.
Well, and, I said earlier that it's opened a world of interesting experiences and interesting people to us. I'm enjoying working with you guys, by the way, and we'll see what happens. But the writing is a journey. There's going to be another book to conclude this trilogy, and then we'll go on to another project. And we keep meeting new people, new friends, having new experiences. What else could you ask for?
Great. Okay, well, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and great to chat to you.
Well, thanks, Liz. Enjoyed talking to you.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.